Hey, Dad, can I ride the new board first?
The new board first is my board. I get to ride it first.
Hey, that's not fair.
It is fair.
Yes. Okay. First, let's do Rochambeau. After, like, if I win, I get to ride it first. But if you win, you get to ride it first.
All right.
Rochambeau.
Okay.
Rochambeau.
Ah!
Rochambeau. Yes!
Hello and welcome to the channel. I know many of you guys are saying, why is this guy wearing sunglasses in the house while he's doing a review? But I have to be honest, I'm wearing these sunglasses because I feel that Propel's future is just that bright. All jokes aside, I really enjoyed this board and I'm sure many of you want to know the details as to why I feel this way. So without further ado, let's get into it. The deck. This board is composed of a maple composite. And when you look at this particular deck, you're going to notice it has a very mellow concave, but at the outer edges of the deck, it actually flares up. And I am a big fan of this particular setup for a couple of different reasons. One of which is where you actually place your feet, it makes the deck a little bit wider. The other thing is that it also allows you to lock your feet in place when you're carving and pumping around. And it is also incredibly useful when you're riding on off-road type situations, which allows your feet not to slip and move around, especially when you're going over uneven surfaces and uneven terrain. So when you talk about those components, I'm a really big fan. One of the other things you're going to notice when you look at this particular deck is that the grip tape design allows you to actually see portions of the deck itself. And in my opinion, the wood that they use on this particular board, the color scheme and the way it looks, it gives it a very premium look and it looks amazing to me. And when you pair that with the grip tape design, it just gives it an overall premium look and it's almost like a head turner. Now, one of the other things you're going to notice when you talk about the deck on this board is that they have a very large logo on top of the deck. Oftentimes, I'm not a fan of really large logos all over the place, but for some reason, the way this logo design is on this particular board, it is not problematic whatsoever to me. In my opinion, I think it actually adds to the aesthetics of the board and it just looks cool. And it probably has something to do with the way that they actually designed it and just the overall scheme of how they designed the grip tape on the actual deck itself. So overall, I'm a really big fan of this particular deck on this board. That's going to take us into the propulsion system. This board is utilizing belt drive. 30 miles an hour. And if you follow this channel, you guys know I'm a huge fan of belt drive for a variety of different reasons. Some of which include the fact that you're often able to change out the gear ratios. You're able to put on the type of wheels that accommodate your riding style or what you want to accomplish when riding your board. And then one of my favorites is, of course, the fact that it makes that jet-like noise. And in my opinion, not only does it sound cool, but it has a practical reason as well, which is the fact that if you ride around pedestrians a lot, the belt sounding noise allows individuals to know that you're coming. So it serves a variety of different purposes. Now the board is also being paired with two 6374 motors, which produces a great deal of torque and acceleration as well. Propel advertises that this board can reach speeds upwards of 30 miles per hour, and in my opinion, it is incredibly achievable. Now, when riding this board, I actually didn't go faster than around 26 miles an hour, and the reason that I do that primarily is because I'm just seeing way too many videos and images of people falling when they're riding at high speeds and really getting some very serious injuries. So I try to hover around that 25, 26 miles an hour ballpark just for safety purposes. Now, what I was able to experience on this board, I have no doubt that this board can actually achieve the top speed that is advertised on this board. And to be honest about it, a lot of brands are actually making honest statements about the top speeds that their boards can actually achieve. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the top speed and acceleration as well. In addition to having a top speed that's relatively high, I also had the opportunity to perform somewhat of a hill climb test when I was actually visiting a new park that was open in Atlanta. And it had a very steep hill there, and I actually ran up this hill a couple of times, and the board was actually climbing this hill at about 16 miles per hour, which in my opinion was very impressive considering my weight, which is around 225 pounds to 230 pounds when you consider gear and things like that. And actually, I feel like the board could have went up a little bit faster, but there was a couple of times because of pedestrians, I had to come off of the throttle a little bit. So of course I lost a little bit of momentum. But if you look in the footage, you can see that I had my wife actually going up the hill as well, and she had a head start, and I actually caught her and passed her while going up the hill. And for those lighter than me, I feel that this board can conquer almost any hill that may be placed before you. So no major complaints there as well. I want to take a moment to share the fact that my son and I have recently published a children's book about our journey of learning how to ride electric skateboards. The book features QR codes that allow individuals to have an immersive experience. The book is available on Amazon and many other book retailers. Now let's get back to the review. This board is also utilizing pneumatic tires, which have a very aggressive tread pattern. And to me, this tread pattern is really well suited for the type of riding that Propel advertises that you can do with this board, which is some all-terrain off-road type riding. And the other thing I noticed about these pneumatic tires is that they were also pretty good in city environments, especially when riding in the grass, on sidewalks, and on roads that were not all that optimal, that were very uncomfortable. The pneumatic tires, these wheels, paired with, of course, the suspension, made for a very, very comfortable ride. If you check out Propel's website, you're also going to notice that they're coming out with some accessories. One of the options is the ability to choose a larger wheel size for individuals who really enjoy that off-road riding experience, or they may be helpful for individuals who live in areas where the roads are just not all that ideal, and you're looking for something to help with that shock absorption and to eat up those cracks and those vibrations when you're actually riding the board. So overall, I really enjoy this setup on this particular board when you talk about the propulsion system. One of the questions that I received often on my social media and my YouTube channel is how large and how heavy is this board? This board is coming in at around 37 pounds. And to be honest about it, when you hear that number, it sounds like that's going to be pretty overbearing. But to be honest about it, guys, it wasn't. And that was one of the things that kind of shocked me, because when you look at the rendering, when you look at this large box that came in the mail, you just thought it's going to be this really huge board, this really overbearing. And to be honest about it, that's not really the case. Now, oftentimes I'm transporting my boards around. If I'm going to stores and things like that, I'll just pull the board by one of the trucks and just drag it around. So the weight is not really that big of a problem. I did actually have to lift this board a couple of times to climb some stairs, and it's very doable. It's not something that you feel like you're gonna break your back when it's time to actually transport this board. So I don't think that that's something that's really a major concern. The battery and the range, and this is probably one of the most unique components of this particular board. This board is shipping with a 15 amp hour battery, 666 watt hours, and a 12S 3P battery configuration. And to be honest about it, this is incredibly impressive to me, especially for a board in this price point. There are boards out there that are twice the price of this board. They have less watt hours. And that's something that needs to be noted and needs to be taken into consideration if you are considering purchasing this board. Now, one of the cool things that I really enjoyed when I visited Propel's website is the range calculations that they have on their website. Oftentimes, you guys know, companies can be very, very cautious and optimistic when they put range specs on their websites and what they claim the range of a board can be. Oftentimes you're going to see something on there like ridden by a rider that weighs 1 pound. No, I'm just joking. Y'all get what I'm saying. But they often choose very light riders to ride their boards to do the range test. One of the things that I really liked is that Propel has range calculations based on different rider weights. For example, they advertise that a 75 kilogram rider should get around 45 kilometers of range, and that a 100 kilogram rider should get around 280 kilometers. And I really like this because I like it when companies are upfront and are transparent with the consumers. They don't hide stuff, they don't hide specs, and that goes a long way in my book. So that was something that I wanted to mention. Now, one of the things that I informed you guys that I would do would be a range test, and I made a slight mistake, guys, on the range test. I actually turned on my range calculation apps a little bit late into the ride, approximately around 3 miles. But nevertheless, I turned it on and I rode about 15 miles that day. So if you add that 15 miles plus that 3 miles, that's around 18 miles. And then the next day, my son actually rode the board, and I know that he's a much lighter rider, but we rode about 67 miles at that particular time as well. So that's going to put the range in a ballpark of around 24 miles. Now, of course, because I told you guys I was going to do that range test, I'm going to go ahead and do that at a later time so that you guys can get a more accurate calculation of the range on this board. But to be honest about it, with the riding that I did, I'm pretty impressed with the range that I was able to experience. And the board had very, very little battery sag. Really, it was non-existent, to be honest about it. So I'm pretty impressed with this battery setup, and I think that the majority of riders who buy this board are going to be satisfied with the range that they're able to get out of this board. And that's going to take us into the rideability section. This board is a perfect cross between being an urban commuter and a board that can be taken off-road. There are many boards that can operate in both environments, but I don't think I've experienced a board that does it in such a manner that is just effortless. This board is incredibly effective in both environments. And when you talk about from an urban perspective, a lot of times you may encounter roads that are not ideal. You may have to ride on the sidewalk. You may go over bumps and cracks, or you may be riding somewhere and just need to quickly jump on a dirt patch or something and get back over because there's pedestrians, and you just feel incredibly stable when doing that. I did also get some questions from Craig, Tim, and Stephen Lord about what does this board feel like when carving? Does it really feel like a skateboard? And when I looked at this board, when I took it out of the package, I honestly thought it was just going to be a heavy monster, and I just thought I wasn't going to have an experience where I felt like I was riding an e-skate. And I have to honestly and gladly say that that is not the case at all. The board carves incredibly well, and the board is very responsive. And in addition to that, the board turns very well also. And in addition to that, the board turns very well. And you're really going to be able to ride this board in a lot of fashions, almost as if you're riding a regular e-skate. Of course, it's going to be a little bit larger. Of course, you're going to have a little bit more capability. But I think that people that ride this board, if you're somebody that wants to carve and you want a larger board, but it still rides like a skateboard, I think that this board is going to fit the bill for you. When you talk about production boards, they're often going to have either one of two ESCs, and that's the Hobby Wing ESC or the Yeeling ESC. And this board is utilizing the Yeeling ESC. Because of that, you get a couple of different features. Of course, you get to choose between 4 speed modes, which is very nice because you get to really customize the riding experience. Another thing you're also able to choose is also your braking strength, because this board also has 4 braking modes, so you can really dial in and customize the experience that you want to have. This may also be a great feature for individuals who may want to let a newer rider borrow their board, because then they can just dial it back, put it in mode 1 for the acceleration, mode 1 for the braking, so that they can have a safe experience. Now, one of the other characteristics associated with this ESC is the fact that you don't have to bend over to turn the board on. All you have to do is simply push the board and it powers itself on, turn on the remote, and you're ready to ride. So that is definitely a feature that I enjoy. Sometimes many consider this particular ESC to be not as refined. This company did a great job in tuning the acceleration and the braking curves. You don't feel like you're being jerked around when braking or accelerating, and to be honest about it, it is very smooth. I think that experienced riders will enjoy it, and I also think individuals who are new to the e-skate arena, they're also going to enjoy how this board responds when you talk about braking and acceleration as well. And that's going to take us into another section that I very rarely include in my reviews, but I felt like I had to actually address those things here because they just need to be addressed. And that is the aesthetics of this board. To be honest about it, guys, when I took this board out of the box, I didn't expect this board to look as amazing as it does. And in a lot of different ways, I feel like this company didn't overlook anything. When you look at this board, there's just a variety of different things that were just done to a high level. One of the things that I just really liked was, of course, the machining. Everything looks neat. It doesn't look cheap. There was nothing that wasn't screwed in, and all of the screws and the bolts match when you talk about from a color scheme perspective. Something that just looks like this is a very premium board, and it's something that I enjoyed. In addition to just the machining and such of the screws, the overall design is very pleasing to the eye. When you look at this board, it's very hard to find areas that you'll say something like, man, I wish they had done this, or man, I wish they had put this here instead of this. There's very little of those things going on with the board. And like I said, there's very little that was overlooked. And in my opinion, they almost exceeded in almost every area, especially for a board in this price point. So the aesthetics of this board look very nice, and it is definitely a board that is a head turner. And when you're riding around, you're not going to be embarrassed to be riding this thing around at all. You're probably going to be doing a little bit of bragging, to be honest about it. And that's going to take me into the nitpick section, which is probably one of my favorite components of my reviews, because I like to share things that individuals in the market should know about. And then also I like to share things that I think could be improved on boards. To be honest about it, I've never had a board like this. When you talk about independent suspension, when you talk about the drivetrain system and such. Consequently, when the board was en route, I thought a lot about what does it look like to do maintenance on a board like this? How difficult is that going to be? How often am I going to have to do maintenance? Are there situations and things that are going to have to make me do more to this board than I'm typically accustomed to? But there was a couple of things that kind of brought down my anxiety associated with that. One of which is the fact that Propel said that they're actually going to produce a series of videos on their YouTube channel explaining how to do things to the board, like routine maintenance, tightening up the suspension system, repairing the suspension system, just things that users are going to need to actually know so that they can keep their board maintained and keep it in tip-top condition. So the fact that Propel is actually going to put together a series of videos really kind of helped reduce my concern regarding what does it look like to maintain this board. So that's kind of a nitpick, but then also I think it's kind of being addressed by the company, because I feel that Propel knows that that's a question that many individuals considering purchasing this board are probably thinking about and considering. Now, another component that actually stood out to me as it relates to the nitpick section is that when you look under the board, you're actually going to notice that there is something actually protruding out of the side of the enclosure that houses the battery and the ESC. When I was looking at this, I was kind of wondering what it was, and it kind of appears like it may be an antenna or something like that to kind of help with the connectivity. And I looked at it and I said, why is that sticking out like that? But after I rode the board, it really became a non-issue, kind of a non-factor, because the way it sticks out, it doesn't protrude past the board. So if you were to scrape against something or whatever the case may be, you probably would hit the deck of your board first, so you don't have to necessarily worry about that item actually hitting. So it's kind of something that stood out to me, but then also it may be somewhat of a non-issue. So that's going to conclude the nitpick section, and that's going to take us into my final thoughts. Every time I ride this board, forget riding it. Every time I walk in my house and I see the board sitting in my house, I'm really like blown out of the water for a couple of different reasons. Primarily because of when you talk about the performance, when you talk about how the board looks, when you talk about the perceived value that individuals get when they purchase this board, I'm still dumbfounded as to how the company is able to produce boards that appear to be of this high of a quality at the price point they're actually producing them at. I just don't understand how they do it. Propel, they probably won't share the secret to the sauce, but I'm just really curious. And that's because this board does so many different things well, and it operates at such a high level for so many different things. The acceleration is very impressive. The torque is very impressive. The hill climbing is very impressive. The range is very impressive. From an aesthetic standpoint, this board looks amazing. It's going to stand out when you ride the board. Every time I rode the board, people are like, what is that board? What is that? Tell me a little bit about it. It's just really a head turner. So I think that this board is really high in a lot of different areas. Moreover, boards like this are game changers. They help propel the sport forward, because when a board like this comes out, others have to take notice and they have to maybe step their game up. It's kind of like what you do with a buddy or a friend of yours. They're like, man, I hit the gym 4 times this week. Next week, you're like, okay, I'm gonna hit it 5 times, because there's a friendly competition that goes on. And we all know that competition is great for the consumers. So if you're an individual that is in the market and you're looking for a board that can serve you in both the off-terrain, off-road type situations, and then also in the urban type situation, I think this board deserves a very, very serious look from you. If you are interested in purchasing this board, please consider utilizing my discount code, because not only does it support the channel, but it allows individuals to know that you appreciate the hard work that I put in with my reviews. Remember, PEVs allow you to be everywhere. And as always, I'll see you at the top because the bottom is too crowded. Peace.